The legacy media seem to be able to amplify the message of the powerful while simultaneously crushing dissent whenever it appears. It's almost as if there's a hidden cartel of legacy media organisers behind the scenes agreeing on what to tell you and what to crush. There is. Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining me on our mutual voyage to truth and freedom. Today, we're going to be looking at the Trusted News Initiative, a global organisation to a degree, state-funded to a degree, corporate-funded, that comprises incredibly powerful media organisations so that they can coordinate in order to amplify particular stories and crush dissent when necessary. You'll be aware of this phenomena whenever you see a news story break and every single legacy media outfit uses the same words, the same language, takes the same position. This is a result of the Trusted News Initiative's decision to amplify the message of the powerful, to regard one another as allies, and to crush independent media at all costs. This, I think, is a necessary and significant move as independent media grows in power and is able to shift the narrative on a variety of subjects. For example, the pandemic. Do you really think there'd be a COVID inquiry in the UK? Such a drop-off in the uptake of COVID booster shots, maybe questioning the budgeting of the Ukraine-Russia war, were it not for the rise of independent media. Have you noticed how significant independent media voices, whether it's Bobby Kennedy, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and of course me, have been subject to incredible and ferocious attacks? And I'm going to take this opportunity to address some of the attacks of a couple of months ago and how they happened and some curious information behind them, as well as looking at the Trusted News Initiative in a little more depth, how they're funded, what their goals are, how they came about, who's in it, and why they use the word trusted as part of their name, almost as if you shouldn't trust them at all. One of the great examples of propagandization in recent years, so extraordinary and immersive you may even have forgotten it happened, was of course the campaign to ensure that everybody got vaccinated during the pandemic era, which in retrospect looks like it may have been a little presumptuous in terms of vaccine efficacy, adverse events, the shaming of people that were vaccine hesitant, not to mention the efficacy of lockdowns, social distancing, mask wearing. A lot of questions were overridden and a lot of people were willing to go with the dominant narrative, perhaps because of an extraordinary $15 billion campaign that seemed to be designed to catch every single cultural demographic without fail. You may have forgotten how immersive it was, so have a look at this.
President Biden's chief medical advisor says people need what he calls trusted messengers.
The White House has now recruited TikTokers, YouTubers,
including some very big celebrities, on how to direct their followers to trusted vaccine content.
Build is one of the largest public education campaigns ever. The goal, convince Americans, get the COVID vaccine.
It's vaccination day. It's vaccination day. It's vaccination day.
Today I get my COVID jab, and I'm feeling really fab. For months I have been waiting for this day.
R-O-N-A-V-I-R-U-S-19. Masked up with my team to smash back the disease, and we dreamed about the day that we'd have a vaccine.
Whether you're a fan of Disney movies or hip-hop, there's something for everyone.
And now that human-made miracle is finally here.
It's Megan Thee Stallion, Ariana Grande, and Jimmy Fallon. Y'all know what time it is. It's time to get those boosters.
They in real life, you need to vax that thing. You're feeling freaky all night, you need to vax that thing.
If you wanna get sticky and hot, go get the shot.
Grab your syringe, but make sure you clean it and stick it in me like you really mean it. It seems so sexy to inoculate.
It's almost as if it was designed to capture every conceivable market and every conceivable audience to direct them towards particular outcomes. I'm going to be telling you a little more about the Trusted News Initiative, as well as addressing a spate of news stories around me a couple of months ago, which were incredibly impactful and led to the government in our country demanding or requesting that I was demonetized by a number of social media platforms, some of whom complied, which appears on some level to have been deeply coordinated and to a degree involved pharmaceutical companies in a way that is surprising. Before I get into the Trusted News Initiative and the personal impact of this phenomena, let's remind ourselves of how effective totalitarian and immersive media coverage can be.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these fake stories
stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
There are two things that are significant here. One, how do you get that many distinct media organizations to say the same thing? And two, do you notice what they're talking about? Misinformation, malinformation, and information sources that cannot be trusted, i.e. independent media. How is it that we've arrived at such a homogenized and concerted media space? The trend towards consolidation in the media industry has had a profound effect on who controls media content. As much as 90% of US media is owned by the following 6 companies: Comcast, Disney, AT&T, Paramount, Sony, and Fox. This is how it's possible to create a coordinated media attack against anybody who tries to convey alternative information or information that might be challenging to the interests of the powerful.
Ivermectin is something more often used to deworm horses.
Rogan telling his 13 million Instagram followers that he was treated with several drugs, and he included ivermectin on the list, a drug used for livestock.
Rogan said the word ivermectin. Yes, that's the deworming medicine made to kill parasites in farm animals.
So things are clearly bad, but they're being made even worse by people who have refused to take the vaccine and instead are swallowing horse paste.
Wait a second. He said that he got better because he ate cattle dewormer.
We have individuals like Joe Rogan, for example, who don't want to take an experimental vaccine but will take horse dewormer.
Joe Rogan, he came down with COVID. He says he's been taking the livestock dewormer.
Suppose in an instant like that, you have to ask, what is the drive behind all of that punditry, condemnation, the continual use of phrases like horse wormer and horse paste? Is it a concern for the American population, their well-being and health, or are there other possible motivations? Are there other possible ties between legacy media and big pharma? Now think about what we've learned in the interim period about vaccine efficacy, vaccine injury, natural immunity, vitamin D, continuing with exercise, going outside. There clearly was room for a conversation, but it seems that what Joe Rogan said to, as they always announce, his enormous audience was somehow detrimental to the interests of, for example, the legacy media and big pharma. But is there an intrinsic relationship between the legacy media and big pharma?
Brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought
And
to you
this
by
Brought to you by Pfizer.
So, Joe Rogan, while conducting a series of conversations with experts on coronavirus and experts on vaccines and dissenting voices, it appears, inadvertently or otherwise, challenged the interests of the powerful, whether that's the government, the legacy media, or big pharma. Other people that have challenged, perhaps not to the same degree as Joe Rogan because of the enormous size of his audience, but in a way that is evidently significant and has drawn their attention, includes, well, me. And it was very similar to that montage earlier. The news stories all use the same language. How is it that disparate global news organizations can always find an on-message attack for any dissenting voice when it's convenient? Almost as if they're controlled by the same advertising and marketing imperatives, they have deep state affiliations, and possibly even beyond that, there's a global cartel cooperating together in order to ensure that there's only one dominant narrative and independent voices are shut down. There is. It's called the Trusted News Initiative. The Trusted News Initiative is a partnership founded by the BBC that includes organizations from around the globe, including AP, AFP, BBC, CBC, Radio Canada, European Broadcasting Union, the Financial Times, Information Futures Labs, Google, YouTube, The Hindu, The Nation Media Group, Meta, Microsoft, Thomson Reuters, Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, The Washington Post, Compass, Indonesia, Dawn Pakistan, India Express, Indeed TV India, ABC Australia, SBS Australia, and NHK Japan. But otherwise, it's an open shop. During his opening statement to the July 20th meeting of the House House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. described TNI as a news censorship cartel. He went on to describe how it actually operates. Whenever non-mainstream online news publishers report facts or viewpoints deemed by the TNI to be misinformation, TNI members censor, shadow ban, or deplatform those publishers. TNI members collectively hold 90% of the overall social media market, a 90% share of the social networking market, 75% of the video hosting market, and over 90% of the search engine market. This is an incredibly powerful organization that dominates the new media space and the social media space. And yet independent media has proved to be incredibly effective when it comes to telling alternative stories about the pandemic, geopolitical crises, and wars are reported on now in ways that would have been unimaginable just 5 or 10 years ago. You can have Vivek Ramaswamy in the middle of a Republican primary debate say that January 6th was reported on incorrectly, that there were deep state operatives cajoling the crowd into violent action. It's an extraordinary time. The world has changed. There is an ideological war taking place right now. And there are numerous significant voices in independent media spaces, and many of them are making an incredible impact. It's very difficult for me to do this because I'm talking about myself and it seems weird. And I also know that in the past I slept around a hell of a lot and I created conditions where it becomes highly likely that after incredible endeavor, it will be possible to approach numerous people and see if there was any conduct which could be reframed down the line as, instead of ordinary promiscuity, malfeasance. In fact, in his conversation with Piers Morgan, Andrew Tate said this:
"The standard playbook for anybody who speaks up against power is sexual exploitation. Isn't that the normal one they go to? Can't we name like 10 or 15 people right now they hit them with this exact same garbage? Name a full-grown man who's 36 or 37 years old who's not had sexual relations with a woman at some point in the past. And the way the Matrix works is they lie by omission, right? They just hit Russell Brand with it. I think they hit P. Diddy with it this morning. Julian Assange just got hit with it. He's still in his cell.
But lots of people get hit with these allegations and it turns out to be true.
A lot of people get hit with them and they turn out to be false.
Now, I know that a lot of people find Andrew Tate a highly divisive figure, but what he describes there is extraordinary and for me feels very resonant. You have to ask yourself the question, what is the legacy media interested in? Is it feminism? Is it helping vulnerable people? Or is it supporting the interests of the powerful? That's a decision that you can make for yourself. If you consider the legacy media to be a set of interests from around the world that are really interested in investigating important stories, like the way they looked into Epstein and Epstein's client list with such diligence and detail, the way that, for example, they were so intrepid when interviewing Albert Bourla around adverse events and vaccine injuries, the way that they supported people's rights to be inquiring and inquisitive in the vaccine era, the way that they encouraged healthy debate around wars. If you look at how the legacy media generally behaves and the projects it supports, the way that it treats dissent becomes a little more easy to understand, particularly when you recognize that there are significant financial relationships between the pharmaceutical industry and the legacy media. Then on top of that, there's an agreement to crush dissent and propagate information that is favorable through the Trusted News Initiative. By their own admission, members of the Trusted News Initiative agreed to work together and have in fact worked together to exclude from the world's dominant internet platforms rival news publishers who engage in reporting that challenges and competes with TNI members' reporting on certain issues relating to COVID-19 and US politics. Now, on this channel, we consistently reported on the pandemic in ways that might be adverse to exactly these kind of interests. Here's a list of some of the stories and facts we reported. Pharma companies spent just under $8.1 billion last year on ad campaigns. Pharma overtook big tech to become the second largest industry for ad spending in 2023. Of course, I said a lot of things about big pharma on this channel. Here's just a few of them. We already know, thanks to the excellent reporting of Li Fang on Substack, that Moderna have been cyber spying on me throughout this period and have published the sort of a fascinating report describing me as high risk. Conspiracists claim Russell Brand was targeted for anti-vaccine beliefs. Russell Brand has a large platform with over 6.6 million YouTube subscribers. They're all very interested in the number of subscribers that people that don't amplify their preferred messaging have. Whilst I would not claim that this is empirical evidence that I've been subject to a collaboration between legacy media organizations and big pharma, it does demonstrate that Moderna have curiously employed deep state operatives and are compiling files on people who question their interests, which seems to me to be beyond the remit of vaccine manufacturers. Let me know in the chat if you agree. Elsewhere on the channel, we talked about other complexities, compromises, and opportunities for profiteering that took place during that period, in particular, ones that were beneficial to the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical corporations like Moderna and Pfizer made $1,000 of profit every second just from their monopoly control of the COVID-19 vaccine, despite its development having been supported supported by billions of dollars in public investments. They charge governments up to 24 times more than the potential cost of generic production. The pharmaceutical industry has spent at least 50% more than any other sector on lobbying since 1998. More than 2/3 of Congress received campaign funding from pharmaceutical companies in the 2020 election. Pfizer spent more than $25 million to lobby the federal government to pass legislation to protect and promote its products since the pandemic began. The company doubled its revenue in 2021 from the previous year, raking in $81.3 billion, and in 2022 made over $100 billion, the highest in its history. In the UK, of course, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of this country, invested in a hedge fund that supported Moderna a couple of years before the pandemic period, curiously, and Jonathan Van Tam, one of the senior government spokespeople during the pandemic period, has subsequently gone on to work for Moderna. So there are doubtlessly connections between the state, big pharma, and the legacy media. And that's before we get into the Trusted News Initiative and their agenda to ensure that when it comes to the pandemic and a variety of other stories, there's the ability to absolutely control the narrative, amplify the interests of the powerful, and shut down dissent. Terms like misinformation and disinformation were not part of the public conversation just a couple of years ago. The type of censorship laws that are being passed now in Ireland, that the EU are lobbying for, and that were passed in this country, the UK, simultaneously to the numerous scandals and campaigns that targeted me, are predicated on the control of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. Here are just some things that they considered to be misinformation at the beginning of the pandemic period. For example, TNI members deemed the following to be misinformation that could not be published on the world's dominant internet platforms. Claims that COVID originated in a laboratory in Wuhan, China. Claims that the COVID vaccines do not prevent infection. Claims that vaccinated persons can transmit COVID to others. Claims that compromising emails and videos were found on a laptop belonging to Hunter Biden. Remember for a moment the gleeful hysteria of that musical montage, and then contrast that with what we subsequently know. Now, would we know any of that had it not been for independent media reporting? Significant voices in the space, primarily I would say from the medical and academic establishment, such as Peter McCulloch and Jay Bhattacharya, people that came out and said, you don't vaccinate in the middle of a pandemic. We invented those vaccines. And hey, you're using modelling and saying that it's empirical science. There was all sorts of information, verifiable, important, and interesting, that was censored and shut down. By who? Groups like Meta, groups like Google, groups like YouTube. Now, a couple of days into the events that surrounded me, the government in the UK spoke to social media platforms and requested that I be demonetised at a time that they were passing censorship laws that prohibit independent media from reporting on exactly these things. Of course, it would be ridiculous of me to deny, because I've been very public about it, written countless books about it, that I was very promiscuous in the past, which as an older man and a father looked a little bit unsavoury. But to amplify it to the point of criminality is exactly where the legacy media made the crucial jump in order to destroy, in my view, a dissenting voice. The TNI exists to, in its own words, choke off and stamp out online news reporting that the TNI or any of its members preemptorily deems misinformation, the lawsuit states. TNI members have targeted and suppressed completely accurate online reporting by non-mainstream news publishers concerning both COVID-19 on matters including treatments, immunity, lab leak, vax injury, and lockdowns and mandates, and US elections such as the Hunter Biden laptop story. Of course, we've reported extensively on all of those subjects. Presumably, that's why Moderna have been digitally spying on this channel and its content. While the Trusted News Initiative publicly purports to be a self-appointed truth police extirpating online misinformation, in fact, it has suppressed wholly accurate and legitimate reporting in furtherance of the economic self-interest of its members. In fact, that's one of the themes of the pandemic period. Information that was regarded as conspiracy theory a couple of years ago has become accepted scientific fact a couple of years later. I would say we're on the precipice of new conversations around vaccine injury, excess deaths, sudden death syndrome, deaths in young athletes, and potentially a much higher than previously imagined mortality rate around people that took certain medications. That's not something that I would claim with absolute certainty, but it appears that there's data that might support that. And if you have independent media, you can have those kind of conversations. The legacy media and the establishment will ensure that that information is controlled, diluted, and that you get to have sort of what you might call the type of controlled demolition of the UK COVID inquiry, where a few patsies and fool guys will be nominated to take a hit. Oh, this person was an idiot, that person was an idiot, but they won't talk about the Wuhan lab leak theory. They won't talk about Moderna's role and some of the connections between big pharma and state officials and some of the extraordinary profits that have been gleaned and some of the terrible mistakes that have been made and how Boris Johnson seems to magically lose all of his WhatsApp messages. The legacy media is not an independent observer of global events. It is a part participant in the maintenance of dominant narratives. Ultimately, I believe all dissenting voices will be discredited and shut down. This is something that there's considerable evidence for because there have been numerous people cancelled and taken out already. And it was very heartening for me to see the amount of organic support that occurred when those stories started to be leaked, that people were like, this is a bit suspicious. Hasn't Russell Brand always been honest about his past? This seems peculiar and coordinated. Of course, I have a vested interest in you believing my version of events over their version of events. That's absolutely true. But more important than my personal feelings is the evident and obvious global campaign to control and censor information, which you can observe in a spate of laws being passed all over the planet, and the relationships that are evident between big pharma and legacy media and the state, deep state agencies and social media. It's obvious. It's plain. Even if you take me out of it, which obviously I can't do because I am me, it's plain that this is what's happening. And the Trusted News Initiative is one of the sort of quieter, more insidious components in how such a machine can be constructed and can be so effective at controlling information and ensuring that dissenting information is discredited and dismissed. RFK's lawsuit cites several public statements made by TNI members. In March 2020, then senior news controller at BBC News, Jamie Angus, explained TNI's strategy to beat disinformation. Because actually, the real rivalry now is not between, for example, the BBC and CNN globally, it's actually between all trusted news providers and a tidal wave of unchecked reporting that's being piped out mainly through digital platforms. The fact that it's unchecked, if you have a look at some of the fact checkers on Meta and some of the fact checkers on Reuters, you will learn that they are not that objective either. When they talk about unchecked information, they mean open communication. That, of course, can be fallible. There's, of course, times when there are errors and mistakes. But what we're actually talking about here is, do you trust organizations of this nature with plain connections to the pharmaceutical industry, plain connections to the state? Many of these media organizations are state-funded media organizations, to discern what information you should have access to. In order to trust them, you would have to believe in your heart that they have your interests in mind when passing the kind of legislation that's being passed right now and in shutting down the kind of stories that they've shut down. And your heart might not be able to take it, possibly because of myocarditis. That's the real competition now in the digital media world. Of course, organizations will always compete against one another for audiences, but the existential threat, I think, is that overall breakdown in trust, so that trusted news organizations lose in the long term if audiences just abandon the idea of a relationship of trust with news organizations. The reason that trust has broken down is because of a demonstrable lack of integrity and authenticity in their reporting, of course, throughout the pandemic period, but numerous stories recently, whether they are international conflicts or apparent domestic insurrections or stories that have been repressed in order to aid elections. It's plain that you cannot trust the legacy media, primarily because of the manner of their funding, their intrinsic relationship with the state, and the fact that they operate as part of a network of interests that require the submission and compliance of the population rather than an informed, awakened, independent population, which is what independent media advocates for almost inadvertently. Even if independent media is not governed by a spirit of activism, just simply telling people the truth is empowering and enables them to challenge the type of narratives that otherwise become fully immersive and unquestioned. So actually, we've got a lot more to hold us together than we have to work in competition with one another. Explaining how TNI acts as a global media monopoly, CHD President Mary Holland said, that's Children's Health Defence, they couch what they're doing, their conspiracy, to suppress independent media, i.e. the voices of dissent about election information and COVID information, as a need to preserve the trust of the people and upgrade the trust. By censoring independent voices, what they're doing is economic suppression. So we have established that there are relationships between big pharma and the legacy media. We've established that the legacy media, including state-funded media, cooperate globally to ensure that only narratives that they approve are able to reach you. We have seen that through censorship laws across the world, there is a movement to crush independent media and independent thought. And we've seen that numerous independent voices have been smeared and shut down for dissenting against the variety of mainstream media narratives. That there are now a number of high-profile figures who have been subject to very aggressive attacks, of whom I happen to be just one. Ultimately, of course, it's not the independent media itself that's the problem. It's the ability of independent media to affect individuals and create situations of disobedience, dissent, mistrust, activism, personal organization, the acknowledgement of the sanctity of the individual, the ability of communities to self-organize. Independent media is a genie that has gotten out of the bottle, and they are desperate to put it back in. Of course, I've personally got skin in the game now because I've been subject to incredible attacks inspired by media collaboration and corroboration, media organizations working together to attack attack me about information that I've always been public and open about, metastasizing it into criminality. And now I find myself in a position where it's a little difficult to be objective because I'm somewhat in the middle of it, having been the principal in a global advertising campaign to find people to attack me and make complaints against me. And even though, of course, I'm interested in myself and my family and my community and this movement, what I'm talking about is much more important than that. And time will show us, time will indeed demonstrate, as censorship laws increase, as the power of legacy media increases, as independent media voices are shut down, that something is happening here that is nefarious. And it's clear that whatever it is, it includes the relationship between Big Pharma and the legacy media, the Trusted News Initiative and their power to control global narratives, and most importantly, you and your ability to determine for yourselves what is true, your ability to decide for yourself whether or not you're going to stand up against this kind of repression, suppression, oppression, and tyrannical control of dominant narratives. So I'd like to thank you for your continuing support. Please keep watching our channel. Remember, we stream every day. Have a wonderful holiday season, but more important than that, if you can, please stay free. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.